All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Becoming a Professional. I'm your host, Mangala, and Riley's also online as we take this week's episode virtual. So Riley, you want to say hi?
Hey guys, how's it going?
That's Riley. He's working as usual behind the scenes magic. Before we introduce our special guest today, let's go through our usual housekeeping. This episode's brought to you by the National Chapter of Beta Alpha Psi, and really thankful for all their support. Please make sure to sign up for the Alumni Member Network if you haven't already, so we can easily connect and have everyone experience all of the benefits that this network has to offer. And just a quick disclaimer, the opinions in this podcast are our own, may not reflect the position of Beta Alpha Psi or our respective employers as a whole. Cool. So on today's episode, we have a fellow podcaster of Lead with Less. So after this episode, please be sure to check out her podcast. And with 13 years plus of corporate HR experience and her own thriving consultancy practice, please welcome internationally certified people leadership coach Tash Pieterse. Did I get that right, Tash?
You nailed that. That was
Awesome.
fabulous. You nailed it.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. So maybe we start with a little bit of your origin story. Like, you've worked, I see that you've worked across HR and then now you have your own sort of practice when it comes to coaching. And I see you've done a lot of like different coaching sort of programs as well. So what did the initial stages of your professional career look like after uni?
Yeah, so uh, I went to high school and then I went to university in Hamilton, New Zealand. So small town compared to the US and Australia. And I decided to do human resources, so a business management and strategic management degree and majoring in human resources. And it was the classic, 4-year degree, got all the theory, did all of the things, and then left uni and was like, what is this? What is the world once you leave university? And the start of my career was, this was over 14 years ago. So maybe I don't know what it is like now, but I know that God, it feels like a lifetime ago when you say that. But when I left university, I had this idea that like jobs were just going to fly to me and life was just going to be easy, and I was just I spent thousands of dollars, 4 years of my life doing this degree, and that wasn't the case. I was working at in a nightclub at the time. That's what got me through
Oh,
uni.
okay.
And yeah, and I was at this is going to sound terrible, but I was dating the owner at the time, and
Oh,
I couldn't get a job in HR, and he had just started a new club, and I took over the HR stuff. So I set up all the training manuals, I set up all the onboarding, I trained all the staff, and that kind of got me using my degree in like a practical sense. And then I really wanted to leave that lifestyle of working nights and all those things, and I still struggled to get a job. It was that classic, we're looking for a graduate, but you need to have 3 years experience. You need to do, have all of these things. And I ended up door knocking. I wasn't living in Hamilton anymore. I moved to another town in another city in New Zealand called Tauranga in the Bay of Plenty. And I door knocked and I just dropped my CV off. I contacted people, the GMs, I rung them and I was like, look, this is what I can offer. This is my experience. This is what I'm willing to do. Can I just get a foot in the door? And the health board in Tauranga, the Bay of Plenty District Health Board, which is where they run the hospitals and like the regional clinics and things like that. They happened to have one of their HR people go on maternity leave. And because I knocked on the door and I kind of just shoved my way in there, he was like, oh, well, I'll take a punt on you and I will turn that 1-year maternity leave contract into a graduate role.
okay.
And I took it. I was like, yep, absolutely. I'm in. I'm going to go for it. And I went all in. I, worked hard. I just made it my own. And yeah, and then that really started my career. And I was lucky that I had a great manager that came in above me and really supported me. But that was the start of my career. It was very different to what I expected and kind of set the tone for how I went through the rest of my career from there.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Because I think like after that you went into not consultancy, like I think the government, was that right? You went into
Yes.
okay. Yeah, yeah, because I saw like as in I was doing a bit of research on you before the podcast, and I saw you'd had such a diverse experience, which we love here at the Becoming a Professional podcast. We want to try and find like, speakers who can share like the diversity of experiences, right? So what made you like go to that like afterwards? I'm curious to just unpack that a little bit more, like your career milestones, I suppose.
Yeah. So the district health board is secondary government. So you're still in the public sector, you're still in the government space, but you're secondary.
Mhm.
And then my next role was I went into core governments. That was the Ministry of Education. And I guess the jump there, it was mostly personal driven. So I had gone through a breakup and there was kind of nothing holding me in that city. So I was like, well, why not just see what else is there? And so I applied for jobs in Auckland, which is one of the main cities in New
Mhm.
Zealand.
New Zealand, yep.
And I took that role and was just like, why not? Just see what happens. And I'm someone who can get bored quite easily if I'm doing the same stuff over and over and over again. So I am always looking for ways that I can really expand my experience, do things that is very different and just can really challenge me in different ways. And yeah, so then I went to the Ministry of Education and I almost like quite quickly got bored. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
core
No,
government's really
I
for
saw you
me.
had some stints. Like, yeah, you had like I think it was like 2 years here, 2 years there. Like you had and that's
I've
great,
actually
right? I
never
mean, like
been somewhere for
especially
2 years.
what was that, sorry?
I haven't actually been somewhere for 2 years. So my
Oh
longest
wow, okay. So
stint,
less than 2 years.
yeah, so my longest
Yeah.
stint was 16 months. And,
Wow.
a lot of people had perceptions of that, like, oh, this is not going to
Yeah.
look good on your CV. But that like over 14 years of my career, I was only judged on that once when when a company said, oh, you've moved around too much, but they didn't even actually ask me why, like what was the reason why I moved around and why I changed. And so I was like, well, you're not the company I want to work for anyway. But the longest I've ever stayed at a company was 16 months before I went out on
See?
my own. And a lot of people would be like, oh my gosh, that's not good for your career. Like that's going to hinder you. But it never did, because I leveraged that in a way of I can hit the ground running really quick. I can get my
Yep.
head into the game. I can adapt really quickly. And I'm here to make moves quickly. I'm here to make a quick impact and to do big work. I'm not
Mm.
here like, and that's just my personality. Like, I'm not here to do like long-term BAU work where I'm just doing the same thing again and again. That
Yeah.
just it doesn't leverage the way that my brain works. It doesn't leverage the way that my strengths work. And so I wasn't going to feel bad for that. And
Yeah.
I just learned how to articulate it in a way that made it compelling for a company to want me versus judging me for not being able to stay somewhere for a long time.
Yeah.
And there were other
Yeah.
factors, like company culture,
Yeah.
growth opportunities, things like that, that also played a part in that. So yeah, when someone looks at my CV, they'll be like, oh gosh, she's moved around a lot. But
Yeah.
now with what I do in my coaching practice, it's the best thing that I could probably have in my toolkit because I have
Yeah.
such different experience.
Yeah. And I think that's actually that momentum, like, if we think about maybe 30, 40 years ago, that might have been the case, like the judging mentality. But I think like increasingly nowadays, I certainly like I myself, like whenever we go, like, and Riley can attest to this, a lot of the sort of students that come to our conferences, like one of the common questions is actually like, how do you find like our passion? Like, how does it like, how can we know exactly what job we're going to be in? And like when you sign up for a grad job or an internship and you're expected to be there for the rest of your life, kind of thing, right? So absolutely super relevant. So I guess that leads me to my next question of when did you make that decision to kind of I guess step aside corporate, I'm going to start my own thing. Like when did you decide to start your own practice? And well, I mean, you've touched on it briefly, but what other factors led to that decision?
Yeah, so in 2015, I was made redundant, and I think, do the US say redundant? I think they say redundant, right? Or
Yeah.
disestablished or lost my job, restructured,
The
you know,
restructure, yep.
yeah.
I think
I
they
know.
still have similar lingos.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was made redundant, which I lost my job, and
Yeah.
it was permanent and all of those things. And I just had this thought to myself, I was like, if I can't even hold on to a permanent job, then what's the point? What's the point in having a permanent job? So I was like, I'm never going to be permanently employed again. And I know that's quite a huge statement to make, but after that, I only went for fixed term roles. So I only went for roles that was a maximum of 12 months, because I thought to myself, if one of the things that I really enjoy is change in terms of the work that I do and the way that I, create impact in organizations, fixed terms are actually a great way to do that, because we both know that there is an end date, right? We both know like what I'm here to do within that. And then that actually catapulted my career in a huge way, because I went for my first senior position. I got a huge jump in my career. And after that, I was going to move to London for 2 years, but then I met my now husband. So I didn't move to London for 2 years. I went traveling for a little bit instead. And I came back and I went to work for one of the big fours. So one of the big four consulting firms, professional services. And I was like, this is the epitome of my career. It's like, it's the name you want on your CV. Yeah. And I went into that. It was actually a permanent role. And I was like, oh, okay, first kind of thing. And then, and then I went into it and I was like, this is not for me. It was just the absolute environment that wasn't conducive to how I worked and what allowed me to be my best. And it was that classic example of what was sold in the interview versus like what the reality was once you're really in it. And 3 months later, I was approached by someone I knew who was building a brand new team in a brand new HR team in a startup. And she was like, I want you to help me do that. And it was a fast growing startup. Now called, you might know Crimson Education. It was that, that company. And it was that I took a fixed term for that with the intention that I was only going to stay there for a year. And when I was there, I found coaching. Because when I was at that big four, I reached out to a coach and I started that work. And I was like, oh my gosh, this work is incredible. Being able to do this work, to be able to have these conversations, to challenge my mind in this way. And I was like, I need to know more about this. And so I started my coaching certification while I went and worked for Crimson. And Penny, who I worked for, she was also a qualified coach. So she understood and she knew kind of everything that I was going through and my drive for that. And while I was doing my coaching certification, I actually started my HR consulting company and I consulted back to Crimson, because I was like, I don't want to be employed in any way. I now want to really go out and do my own thing. Also because I was getting really tired of doing restructures and just, not having enough control over the work that I was doing. And so that was my first step into self-employment, was starting my HR consulting company. And then while I was consulting back, I started doing coaching and I started getting coaching clients. And I initially was like, I'm leaving corporate forever. I'm had enough. I'm cynical. I'm done. And I just did life coaching initially. And then every client that ended up finding me were professionals in corporate. That was a big attraction point to me, because I had a big network in HR. I'd spoken at conferences, I'd created communities, I was quite well known. And so I found my way kind of circling back into corporate. And now I do people leadership coaching with predominantly people in corporate and with business owners and in that space. And that's really what drove me from being made redundant to wanting to really be in control and be the driver of my career and what I wanted to experience and what I wanted to do. And then I guess finding my purpose, because in HR, to some extent, you do coaching, but it's more advising. You're telling managers what they need to be doing, but you're always biased by the company in some way. And that's what really appealed me to coaching, was I could have really frank, blunt, direct conversations with leaders, and I wasn't tied to the company. I could be really honest of like, what are we doing here? What is it that you really want to do? And that's really what connected me to my purpose rather than passion. I wouldn't say this is a passion. This is my purpose. This is my mission that I want to work into. And that's what led me here. Led me to doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, right? Like your point around like you're able to be so blunt and frank, because sometimes like when you're working on behalf of a company, like you have to toe that company line. Like there's a little bit of that. Yeah, like and it's great. So I guess like how did you muster up that courage? Like what was there ever a sort of a point where you're like, okay, I'm going to take this leap of faith? Like, was that when you said you were at Crimson, like, and for the benefit of our readers, Crimson is one of the biggest like educational consultancies, I think, right? Like that was founded out of New Zealand. So yay, New Zealand. That so it was, yeah, like, was there a point when you were doing when like, you said that you were opening up your own consultancy practices, also consulting to Crimson on behalf of your own consultancy practices, and then eventually you made that decision to kind of go out completely. Like, what at what point were you like, okay, I'm going to take that leap of faith?
So for me, I had to do a lot of work on my mindset of what do I need in order to be my best. And one of the things for me is I can fall into scarcity quite quickly. I can fall into fear quite quickly of I don't have enough money, like where's the clients going to come from? So one of the baseline criteria for me was I need to have enough money behind me that it will support me at least for 6 months, so that I can really, so that I'm not panicking about where the next invoice is coming from and where the next client's coming from and things like that. So that was like number one for me of what do I need in order to be my best? And for me, that's security. I need to have some sense of security around me so that I can be open, I can be trusting, I can be more, risky with the things that I'm going for and the things that I'm doing. And so it wasn't this, I'm starting a business and I'm just going to jump and hopefully hopefully I can figure it out, which a lot of people can do, and I admire that. And I also know that that's not how I can function.
Not you. Yeah.
And so I put a plan in place, and I actually ended up with being with Crimson for almost, I would say it was almost 2 years, because I worked as an employee and then I transitioned into consulting, and I just continued to do the work with them. And that was almost like that security of I still have them, I still have that income, I'm still doing that work that I enjoy, plus I can now start to do some business development to acquire new clients. And once I had enough clients outside of Crimson, that's when I knew I was like, okay, I can do this. And that's when I also was building my coaching practice on the side of that. So in 2020, I actually went full time in my coaching practice and finished all HR consulting. So I don't do any HR work now at all. And so for the last 4.5 years, I've been doing only coaching. But that was, So, I mean, you can almost call this transition all the way back from 2015, right? Where I went from being permanently employed to fixed term, really kind of playing that. Then, then going into self-employment, but contracting back to a stable, client, and then transitioning into really, I guess, my own self-employment journey. So it was very slow in transition for me, because I knew that that's what I needed in order to be my best. And I don't know how often people think about that when they're wanting to create change, or when they're wanting to take the plunge into entrepreneurship.
Yeah. I think like there's sometimes like, people think of, including myself, like entrepreneurship, like when you think of that word, you're like, okay, there's a, decision point where you just like go all in and you're like, step away immediately. But I think from what you're saying, like there was that transition period, and it's gradual, right? Like sometimes it's gradual. It's not just, okay, I quit my job today and then like I'm going to suddenly have a startup on my own. So aside from, I guess, the financial stability aspect and, getting, your sort of a little bit more confident stability, what other advice do you have for our listeners who may be considering, wanting to pursue that entrepreneurial lifestyle?
I would say number one is work on your mindset. What are the things that you believe about entrepreneurship? What are the things that you believe you need to be, you need to have, you need to stop, you need to do? Just really getting an understanding of what's actually going on in your mind about what you think, feel, and believe about entrepreneurship, because that hit me. That hit me, almost at every stage. Every time I grew, every time I did something different, I got hit with like this next thing that I, didn't think about or didn't know that I believed, and I then needed to work through it. And I think that's sometimes the only way you can realize, right, when you take a next step, the next mindset challenge raises itself. But I think for those who are considering getting started is, number one, have whatever security you need in order to be your best. Number two is work on the mindset. So what are the things that you're most scared of, and what are the mindset practices, the mindset, confirmations, the mindset shifts that you need to make in order to be able to handle, right, those fears, to be able to and it's not about saying to get rid of those fears, because fear is inherently part of how our brain works, but how will you handle it when it shows up, when it wants to block you? And then thirdly, have people around you who are doing that. One of the things that I see happen too much, and I coach quite a lot of people who are wanting to start their business, and who are wanting to be great leaders of their own companies, is they talk to their parents, or they talk to their family members who aren't entrepreneurs, who aren't doing these things, and they're not the people. Like, they love you and they don't want you to fail, and they want to keep you safe, but they're not the people that are going to support you in a journey that they don't know anything about. Right? Because they're going to share from where they are. And so get yourself into spaces, whether that's getting a coach, whether that's joining a mastermind, a coaching program, a network where other people are doing what you want to be doing, or what you are doing, so that when you have those inevitable moments of, I can't do this, I want to quit, I want to go back to my job, I want to, do all these things, you've got people who have worked through that, who can pull you forward, who can lift you up. Because your friend who isn't doing it, like, yeah, they love you and they're going to want to see you succeed as well, but they're not going to necessarily be able to give you what you need in order to push to that next level, in order to push through the fear. And so those have been, that third one, being in those spaces with people who are doing it, has kept me sane for the last 5 years, of being self-employed. Because and my husband now works for himself too, so we I've got him that we can talk to as well. But before that, and it's also just other people who are doing completely different things to you, and it just gives you an idea of what's possible that's outside of what your norm is. So those would definitely be my top 3, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned before there was also the mindset shift, the mindset practices. Like, what are some of the mindset practices that, I guess, in addition to being entrepreneurial, I guess, like you mentioned as well, they want to be leaders with their own company. Like, what are some of the mindset practices that every leader needs to work on? To be as successful as you are, your husband and the other entrepreneurs that have succeeded?
Yeah. I think number 1 is be okay with not knowing. I think one of the traps that we fall into, especially if you've been a great employee, a great individual contributor, you are likely quite a subject matter expert in terms of what you do. But when you step out, you don't realize how much you don't know about anything. I didn't accounting is definitely not something that is any part of my zone of genius, any part of my wheelhouse. And I'm like, what even is this? So I have an accountant that does that, which is great. And I have a baseline understanding of how that works, which is great. But I've really had to be okay with not just not knowing. And I guess the mindset shift is everything can be figured out. You just need to be willing to figure it out. And, some of my imposter thinking, there's 5 imposter types, and one of my imposter types is the expert. It's like, or the natural genius. If I don't know it straight away, I just get disheartened and I'm like, I'm done. Like, I don't want to learn about it anymore. And I had to really learn to overcome that in business, because I just don't know. Like, I've never had to sell before. I've never had to market, because that wasn't my background. And I'm so jealous of people who go into business that come from marketing backgrounds. I'm like, you just you have it in aces, it's just
market
like, you're lucky.
Yeah.
But I have my skill set that I can leverage. And so I've had to really work on, well, if I'm going to be successful, I need to learn to be okay with figuring it out, with not knowing, like, who am I talking to? Who am I reaching out to? What am I willing to learn? And so I'm constantly having to remind myself, like, if I don't know, it doesn't mean that I'm failing. It doesn't mean that it's not going to work. It just means that I need to figure something out. It just means that I need to ask a different question. And that's where my coaching becomes really helpful, because I can really work to self-coach myself. I'm like, well, if I did know, what would I be doing? If I could figure it out, what would I do? If I didn't know who would be the person I would reach out to. And so I may not have marketing skills, I may not have accounting skills, but I do know how to coach myself, and I do know how to coach and ask good questions. So that first mindset practice, and that's just doing it again and again and again, because every day you're going to be confronted with something that you don't know. And this is the same with being a leader in a company, like being a business owner, being a leader of a team. Like, you don't know, you just can't know everything. And so you need to be willing to be okay with that, and putting the ego aside of, my knowledge is what makes me valuable. It's no, my ability to figure things out is what makes me valuable. It's the value that I bring to the table. The other mindset practice is, celebration of what is working. So I don't know if you do video on this podcast, but I've got a wins jar, which is a pickle jar. I'll just explain it in case you don't do video, but a pickle jar that's got colorful Post-it notes in it. And it's something that sits on my desk, and I call it my wins jar. And every time I overcome something, like say I'm going down a mindset negative spiral, and I come out of it and I work through it, I write it on my wins, I write it on a Post-it note and I put it in my wins jar. When I get a pitch approved, like when I, when you said yes to me coming on your podcast, that went into the wins jar. When, I did.
Yes, we made it into the wins jar.
Yeah. And so, at the end of the week, I reflect on what are the things that I'm really proud of? What are the things that worked? What are the things that didn't work, but I worked through? And when I have those moments of doubt, when I just don't want to do it anymore, when I've had many moments where I want to quit my business and just go back to a job because it just feels like it would be easier, I look at that wins jar because it's physically on my desk, and I'm like, but I did all those things, so I can do this thing. I can do this thing that I don't want to do. I can do this thing that feels really hard. And we don't do that enough. We don't reflect on what is working, what we have moved through. So often people come to me, it's like, oh, I can't do this thing. It's like, well, why? Because I haven't done it before. Okay. How many things have you done before that you never did before that brought you to this point? There's so many examples of things that we did that we didn't think we could do because we hadn't done it before. But we don't reflect on that enough because our brains are also recently biased, right? So we only remember the most recent things, and it's like, well, I haven't done this thing. It's like, yeah, well, cool, we haven't done this thing, so that's a good thing. And and that's why another mindset practice I also use is, I see imposter thinking or imposter syndrome, but I try not to say syndrome, but imposter thinking or self-doubt is a really good thing. And people always go, why? I'm like, because it means I'm doing something different. It means I'm doing something uncomfortable. It means I'm doing something stretchy. And it can either hold me back, or I can choose to see it as something that's changing me, right? That's challenging me. And if we never have those moments, we're just coasting. Like, what are we doing? Nothing.
We're just
right. We're just going through another, we're just doing nothing. And that's the kind of tenacity and grit you need if you want to build a business, if you want to be a great leader, because there's going to be a lot of moments where you just don't want to do it, or you don't know how to do it, and you're just going to have to figure it out, and you're going to have to reflect on all the times where you did figure it out and it got you here.
Yeah, wow, that's really powerful for especially like I got a lot of value from that. Like, I think hopefully our listeners are jotting down some notes as well as you're going through. Like, there's so I guess like there's that sort of resilience mindset, right, where you're just like, okay, I just have to get through it. But I think what you're saying is as well, like that wins jar is to actually sort of say, okay, manifest like some of the happiness, some of the good things that you've been able to overcome and been able to do, and then let that, kind of help you overcome the current challenge that you're facing. Yeah, that's a different way of thinking for sure. I guess we've touched on the IQ part of it, right? Like the problem solving, the analytical thinking, and like, those aspects of, I guess, what makes a good leader. But then equally, I think I've heard this train of thought where emotions, like recognizing your emotions and sort of like, being in touch with your emotional side, like having that EQ is also equally important in leadership. So I guess, Tash, like, why do emotions even matter in leadership? Like, and how do you use them to build yourself as a great leader?
Yeah. Well, emotions matter because we all have them, right? And I think the world is shifting where we are talking about emotions more. Emotions are becoming part of the conversation in the workplace. And whereas we're not in the time anymore where it's like, I'm this person here, and then I don't feel when I'm at work. But to experience something, right? And we think about work as an experience, right? It's like, I want to experience growth. I want to experience belonging. I want to experience challenge. I want to experience all of these things when I'm in my work, when I'm doing my work, when I'm going to my company. But to experience something is to feel something. We can't have an experience if we don't have an emotion.
Yeah. That's what makes us human.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And so much of our actions are driven emotionally. We think we're rational people, but there was an emotion that happened first, and then you justified it with rationality, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why emotions are important in leadership is if we can get clear on the emotional experience that we want to create or we want to have, it makes our actions and our behaviors more intentional. And I even talk about this in the sense of goal setting. So many people, when they set goals, they're very outcomes focused of what's the result, what's the outcome I want. But I kind of take it back and like, what is it that you want to feel? So if we just use like a very kind of mundane example of, I want to lose 5 kilos. So we're focusing on the result, right? Like, I want to lose the 5 kilos. Why do you want to lose the 5 kilos? How do you believe you will feel without the 5 kilos? Well, I'll feel confident. I'll feel lighter. I'll feel more at ease with myself. I'll feel more energized. How different does that feel? So instead of thinking about the 5 kilos I want to lose, how can I connect to the emotion that I want to experience? And so then when we think about exercising, well, I'm going to do this because I want to feel energized. I want to go to the gym because I want to feel confident. This is such a different driver to, I need to go to the gym because I need to lose 5 kilos. And it's the same thing at work. And this is the work that I do with leaders. There's two paths that I take leaders on. Number one is, how do you want people to feel as a result of your leadership? So how do you want people to feel when they're in your presence, when you communicate with them, when you work with them through something, when you support them? How do you want them to feel? And I use the emotional culture deck, which was developed by Riders and Elephants. I'll send the link to you so you can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I feel like there's going to be a lot of show notes from this, Tash, just saying. So people need to check out the Lead with Less podcast. And the show notes
I'm interviewing the founder of the emotional culture deck. It's coming out in January, but it's just a deck of emotion words. So there's desired emotions and undesired emotions. And I get leaders to go, how do you want people to feel as a result of your leadership? And they choose 3 to 5 cards. So they might want people to feel connected, supported, acknowledged, courageous, and welcomed. And then I go, okay, so what are you doing as a leader to create those emotional experiences? We can't control how people feel, but we can influence emotion. And leaders have the highest influencing power to people at work because they spend the most time interacting with them. And so that's the first part. And then the second is, how do I not want people to feel as a result of my leadership, but they might from time to time? And then if I notice these emotions, like, what are some of the signals that these undesired emotions are showing up within my team? What am I going to do when I notice these emotions coming up? Because they will, right? We don't want to experience undesired emotions, but we do. And so that is a really powerful exercise for leaders, because if you want your people to be high performing, if you want them to be successful, if you want them to feel like they belong, if you want them to interact and engage, you need to know, how do they want to feel? Right?
Sure.
And then you can also then run this exercise with your team and go and ask each of your team to go, what do I need to feel in order to be my best? And that'll be different for every single person, because the way we experience emotion is different, right? What connects success is different. So for me, what I need in order to be successful is to be optimistic, which means I accept reality of what's happening. And I know that things will always get better. It'll always turn around, during our hardest moments. I need to be courageous, which is I need to accept that fear is present and be willing to do the scary thing anyway. And so then what are all of the things that I'm doing to create those emotions for myself,
Mm.
right? And leaders can do the same thing for themselves in terms of the experience that they create. And then individuals can also do this for themselves. So I do this in career coaching too, of
Mhm.
okay, how do you want to feel in your career? And then that becomes a driver for what decisions they make. What companies are they pursuing? When they think about that company,
Mm.
what do they feel?
Yeah. Yeah.
I should have done
Yeah.
that for the Big Four, right? I should have known how to do this then.
So-
Um, it's such a different way to make decisions because
yeah.
how we feel drives almost everything. And that's a part of
Mm.
ourselves that we're not connecting into enough. And
Yeah.
we can't use our emotions if we don't know what they are. And if we don't
Yes.
define the emotions that we want. So that's why it's important. But the other reason emotions are important in leadership is because emotions are contagious.
Right. You
We all
can.
know, right? You
Yeah.
walk into
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
room
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's been a fight and you're like, you can feel it,
Ah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. The
Yeah.
awkward. Yeah. Like as in
Yeah,
when you walk in, you're like, wow.
right?
Yeah.
Because emotions are energy, right?
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah. Yeah.
all we're all energy. And so
Yeah.
from a leadership perspective, the EQ, there's 4 elements to EQ. So emotional intelligence, there's self-awareness. So how well do
Yeah.
I know myself? And we need to
Yeah.
have an emotional awareness of ourselves. Like, do
Mhm.
I understand my emotions? Can I acknowledge my emotions? Can I name them? Can I accept them? Am I moving through them? Then there's social awareness. Am I paying enough attention to the people around me, to my team? What's
Mhm.
their body telling me? What are they not saying? How are they responding? How are they reacting? Then there's
Mm.
compassion of, how, and that's the like, how do I emotionally connect to my people within a,
Mm.
well, while having boundaries, and we need to know ourselves in order to do that. How connected I am to the purpose of what I'm doing, right? Like, am I connected to the work that I'm doing? Am I connected to the reason that I'm here doing this work? And then, sorry, there's a 5th one as well, which is regulation, our ability to regulate our emotional state and our emotional experience. And if we don't work on those 5 aspects to build our emotional intelligence, our contagious energy and our contagious emotion usually is unhealthy because we do not have a sense of
Yeah.
stability, right? And we all have had experience of leaders where you're like, whoa, I don't know what I'm
Yeah.
going to expect from that person. I don't want to be around that person. They're really
Yeah.
impacting me negatively, because emotions are contagious. And so we need to be mindful of the way that we are showing up, the way that
Showing. Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
feeling and expressing, and then also what is the environment that I'm creating for my people. And if we do that emotionally, if we do that from a perspective of emotion as well as the other things, you will have a completely different experience of work. Because the number one thing that I hear from people is, I don't feel like I can be myself. And usually what that means is I don't believe I can feel what I need to feel at work.
Mm-hmm. 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 And yeah, and I think like when you don't have that emotional safety, then you kind of, yeah, like as in work just becomes work, right? And like, you quit sooner or rather than later. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's a really interesting way of, I guess, like reverse engineering almost, right? Like because a lot of people, and especially super relevant in the age of AI, right? Like what differentiates us from between human and AI is the fact that we embrace these emotions and we try and like think about it of how do you want to feel rather than like being so outcomes focused all the time. So that's a very, yeah, that's cool. That's a very good tip for our listeners. Um, I guess yeah, like I mean, I'm looking at the time as well. Like, really want to unpack like a lot of this stuff, but there's a lot more I'm sure to be found with your Lead with Less podcast. How long have you actually been into podcasting though, and what's been your sort of favorite memory with it? Like, did you have something else before the Lead with Less? Like, were there any early stages that you can share with us?
Yeah, so the podcast is, I think, almost 18 months old, so 17 months. So I released it in July 2023. And before that, I had a Lead with Less weekly email, but I don't like writing. Writing is
Good.
not my strong suit. As you can tell, I am very good at the chat. I'm very good at talking. I love to talk. And so I thought, like, why not? Right. And I've had a lot of clients over the years say, you should start a podcast, you should do that. Like, you should just, it'd be so nice to listen to you. And I run programs and I record trainings. And I just thought, why not? Like, I was scared
Yeah.
because I feel like it's a little bit more vulnerable because over edit yourself, and I didn't want to over edit. But it's honestly been the best part of my business since I've done it, because it leverages my strengths. It leverages something that is very easy for me. And also interviewing people has just been so incredible to bring different perspectives in, and just to challenge my own thinking, and to bring diversity of thought that maybe people wouldn't normally kind of tap into. And so, yeah, my favorite thing is something that's super accessible, right? It's free to access. I won't say free to make, because we know that podcasts are not free to make. They're free to
Riley can definitely attest to that.
Free to access. It's low barrier, and it's just fun, and the amount of feedback I've received from people who can't invest in coaching for whatever reason, but have the ability to tap into that knowledge, those insights, those perspectives. It's the best. It's the best feeling to be able to make my work accessible in that way, and in a way that just feels really easy to do.
No, that's that. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate it. You've been like there's so many things that we've covered in this podcast, I feel like. But maybe there's a part 2, right? Is that possible, Riley?
Yeah, maybe.
We get a part 2 going.
We can definitely make that happen. And also, as you're talking about your podcast experience, Tosh, I'm actually looking at the website right now, and we'll have this all in the show notes, like your website, the links to your podcast. But I just saw that your most recent episode. So we're actually recording this on, what is it, November 8th. I see that your most recent episode that you released on the 5th. It's episode 69, Spicy Opinions I Have About Leadership. So this one, Mangala, we're definitely going to have to listen to this afterwards, because I'm very intrigued.
Yeah. Well, that was actually, I was going to say, like, where can our listeners find more of your content? But there you go, Riley's already found it. So it's very Googleable, right, Tash?
Yes, yeah. Lead with less. And yeah, on my website. Yeah, so it's all available. It's Lead with Less is on Spotify and YouTube. We've just started putting our episodes on YouTube as well, and also Apple. So yeah, it's all there.
There you go. Any final takeaways for our listeners? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I think just when you were saying about the demographic of your listeners, whether early stage or mid-career, I think just allow yourself to experiment. I think that's the number one thing. Take it from me, I'm someone who hasn't done the traditional 5 years here and 10 years there, and I've still come out pretty okay. Still functioning.
Okay,
I'm still
still
going. And the world is changing, and I think, and it's something that you were saying a bit earlier, Mangala, is we don't know what we want until we experience what we don't want. The contrast is an important part of the human experience. And yes, in hindsight, I'm like, I shouldn't have taken that job, or I shouldn't have done this thing. But hindsight only happens because we made that decision in the first place. We only got the lesson because we had the experience. And I think I feel like Gen Z are probably a bit more experimental, but I know for me as a millennial, I'm probably speaking very categorically here, but I was, very much grown up of like, don't make mistakes, make sure you pick the right path, make sure you don't want to waste time, like you don't want to waste money, but like, who cares? I mean, yes, don't make stupid decisions. I'm not saying that, but allow yourself to experiment and change your mind. I think that's one of the biggest things that we don't allow ourselves to do enough, is being open to changing our mind, because it can sometimes shake who we believe we are. But we are constantly changing, and if we don't allow what we believe or what we think or what we do to change with us, we're missing huge amounts of opportunity, and we're likely not getting to where we really need to be going. I could never have thought that I would be running my own business as a coach, because when I started my career, I was like, I'm going for HR director, like I'm gunning for that. That's my vision. And halfway there, I was like, absolutely not, like not doing this. And that did shake a lot of me. But then I just thought, if I can't do it now, then when the hell am I going to do it? And I think that's what people need to remember. It's, you can always make more money. You can always do that thing, but you can never get back time. And if you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it? So that would be my last piece of advice. Like, be willing to experiment and be willing to change your mind, because if you're not going to control your life, someone else will. And that's going to be a very different experience.
So true. So true. No, and I'm sure, like, our listeners, the demographic of our listeners are anyone in their sort of, as you said, early careers, right? And a lot of the times I think when you come from a business degree, generally you tend to be a little bit like, especially accountants, like you tend to be a little bit more risk averse, right? I'm stereotyping here, but like I certainly, I don't know about you, Riley, but I certainly had that mindset as well. Like coming out of uni was being like, you have to be like, not make mistakes, like do it this way. You have to follow that sort of Big Four conventional path. So I guess part of the reason why we have this podcast and why we're having this conversation with you as well is to actually myth bust. Is that a myth bust kind of thing?
Yeah, myth busting. Yeah, absolutely.
in a way. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, Tash. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, like we're looking forward to the next iteration of Lead with Less. And similarly, like, Riley, if we can make it happen, let's do a part 2, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such an amazing conversation. And if anyone has any questions, they want to pick my brain, please just get in touch. I'm mostly available on Instagram and LinkedIn. So definitely get in touch. I love having conversations.
Okay. Well, we can definitely sit here all day and talk about leadership skills and the importance of emotional success, but that's all we have time for. Tash, thank you so much for being our special guest on the podcast. It was such a pleasure to hear your story. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us from whatever platform you're tuning in from. Also, check out the show notes for our various social media pages, official BAP swag, and obviously Tash's Lead with Less podcast and other notes that we've alluded to throughout the recording. Once again, thank you, Tash. And with that, we'll see you on the next episode of Becoming a Professional. Hi everyone, Mangala here with the credits. This episode titled Leading with Authenticity and Emotion was hosted by myself and produced by Rilley Ramos and accompanied by our special guest, Tash Pieterse. Music was sourced from Resolute Audio and Fine-Tune Music on Adobe Stock. And a huge shout out to Beta Alpha Psi for their financial support and keeping the podcast going strong. If you haven't already, please join the Alumni Member Network. Those details can be found in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of Becoming a Professional.